007 First Light is the perfect start for people that have only heard of James Bond and the really hardcore fans that love the franchise. The story of the game is a package that introduces Bond right before he becomes the beloved James Bond. The game gives you the freedom to do missions in multiple ways, but the main two are stealth or full-on punching everything. The game has a lot of great ideas, amazing artistic design, and very well done characters. However, there were a few missed opportunities that could have made this game perfect. In this review, I will talk about the story, world design, combat, and at the end I will put the miscellaneous section, concluding with if I recommend the game or not. The story of 007 First Light is really good, and it's not afraid to do what it takes to increase the stakes. The game starts on the very first and last mission of James as an air crewman, and goes all the way to James being recruited to the 00 program. This is the best way for people that don't know about James to get started into the fandom, and the game covers a big amount of content that shows James growing as an agent. The relationships James builds always start rocky, but end up taking a turn that feels very natural.
Keep up this pressure forever.
The story is easy to follow because James is always at the center of what's happening. I was never cleaning up a mess I didn't make, except for the beginning of the missions where James is getting a setup as to what the missions are. The reason why the story works so well for me is because I always saw what was going on. Things are not just said. My motivation as a player is really strong because even though I have different approaches to finish a mission, it always ends up with something that affects James. Every single character shines on their own, but James shines brighter than all with his charisma and how unpredictable he is. The game has the idea that the agents need to be unpredictable, and there are a few moments where James actually thinks outside the box, and the game allows it, in the story and in the gameplay. I can vividly remember 3 moments where I was caught by surprise with the writing because of how unpredictable it was, and I caught myself smiling because of how clever it was.
I'd say there's still time for a pint. Back in. First round on me.
In the first mission, the game introduced the idea of biometrical weapons that can only be used by certain people, and this idea is never used again. This is a bit disappointing because it would have added a dynamic to the gameplay to mix things up. This would have added a layer to the difficulty, and the game would have benefited from it in gameplay and in storytelling. Imagine if I picked up some weapons lying around and I couldn't shoot them. It would force me to use the very cool mechanic the game has that lets me throw the empty weapons to enemies. One small nitpick I have about the game comes from the way they wrote the story, and it is so small that it's not a problem, but it seems unnecessary. Throughout the story, the character that gives James his tools, Q is his name, is constantly teasing him with a supercar. Multiple occasions they show the car being worked on, and James asks multiple times if the car is ready for a test run. The game is constantly teasing the car, and at the end James gets to use it. The car was mentioned so much that it became a character in the game. There were already topics of conversation around it, and the anticipation to have a mission driving the car was built whenever James went to the lab to get his tools. At the end of the game, the car was uncovered and they showed what happened to the car in the mission. Even when it comes to an object, they emphasize the importance of foreshadowing. The car itself is a huge part of a mission, and it's amazing. I really just want to prove a point that all the characters and relationships were addressed except at the end of the game where they completely forget to mention what happened to one of the main characters. They gave more importance in a full circle moment to a car instead of the second main character. It felt like they forgot about the character or thought that a cliffhanger was a good idea, but it was not. Even if the game says that James will return, that is not an excuse to forget to mention or show what happened to a character that has been there since the beginning. The solution was extremely simple, and yet they didn't include it. All they had to do was mention the character. One line of dialogue would have worked. Other than this one character, everything and everyone shown is constantly mentioned and have a well-rounded story.
That's the training facility. Scenic.
We're not here for sightseeing. In fact, shouldn't be here at all.
The game has beautiful level designs that I got to experience no matter the way I wanted to play. I could try to go through the story as a stealthy James or as a full-on knucklehead punching everything in my way, and the world design worked for both approaches. All the missions have multiple ways to be completed, from making a guard sick and stealing a keycard to make your way through the front door, to climbing a pipe to the second floor of a building to bypass said door. I really tried my hardest to look for a mission that had a linear approach, and I couldn't find it. The locations the game has are huge and designed with these two approaches in mind. This also means that each big location has more than one side mission that changed the way I got to the end of the missions. This doesn't mean that the outcome of the mission changed at all. The story is linear, but the way I got to each story segment changed depending on how I wanted to play, or how much information I had before I got through a section. Each mission started with me gathering information about the places I was in. I got this information by eavesdropping on some people around the map or just talking to NPCs. Once I got that information, I got the side missions I mentioned before. The sections of looking for clues or listening to people are the slowest part of the game because I never really started a big mission shooting enemies, and this makes the game feel like it always follows the same gameplay pattern. Except for the last mission. I looked for clues, chose the way I wanted to go through the mission, and then it ended with me punching people or shooting people, followed by an end cutscene. Not only is the world design beautiful, but every location I got to had something that caught my eye. On the first mission, I had a mansion with a bunch of rich people, and the inside of the mansion looked incredible. There's a mission where I was in a shipwreck, and even though it doesn't sound very pretty, the environment is captivating because of all that is going on in the map. There's also a more relaxed and even more beautiful location, and that was a museum. The color contrast on the screens was beautiful, especially before I got into combat. The last one, and the most beautiful, was the mission on a tropical island. The beginning segment was beautiful and peaceful as well, but even if that mission ended in a bullet storm, the mission spices it up by ending it with a sky full of fireworks. Every single mission has something that makes it different from the rest, and it's always something unexpected.
Oh look, more target practice.
How thoughtful of.
There are little details the game has that I appreciate, from artistic decisions to how clever some things are. And I want to put some emphasis on these things because I thought they were clever. I want to start with the very first thing that caught my attention, and it was the training montage. When James is training for the 00 program, there's a montage of everything you will need. It's a tutorial, but at the same time, a very fast-paced section of story combined into 15 minutes of gaming. This was a great way to tell the player that time passed, an amazing way to teach the player how the game works, and an interesting way to show the characters and how the relationships advance in that period of time.
Give it everything you've got.
Everything he's got isn't close to enough.
The colors in the world also look incredible, and the game does a great job not overly using the same color palette. This is the reason why I wanted to talk about the world design. Every place looks so different, but still so nice. If you are the type of person that hates yellow paint that guides you to locations in-game, well, get ready for the next big thing: blue paint. Most times the game just has a mixture of yellow paint in the mountains that make it seem like a crystal, and blue tarps in locations that can be construction or industrial places. It could have been all yellow paint, but the artistic design makes it fit into whatever location you are. And small details like this are what sells that you are in a shipwreck or in a museum. Another of those clever things is the fact that almost everything comes from your watch. Every time James is getting debriefed, they give him a watch or fix his watch, so that's the main weapon or utility tool. The game shows that in gameplay as well by James using the watch constantly when you're playing. Instead of using a flashlight like any other game would, James can see inside vents with a red light coming from the watch. The watch tells you the information of the resources you have, like the battery and the chemicals you need to pull off some moves, and right next to it, the focus bar. It's just a pretty creative way to give me all the information I need and make it in a way that fits the game. The game has a lot of really cool and crazy set pieces where there are these incredible things happening, like James following an airplane or James shooting on a high-speed boat. Every single one of them is amazing, except for the very first car chase after the main mission. This car chase felt lifeless, with nothing happening at all, and it surprises me they showcased the game with this instead of everything else they got in the game. If you saw this car chase and thought it was boring, I can tell you it gets much more crazy than that, and most of them come from halfway through the mission. After I find the clues and decide how I will approach the mission, the game puts enemies in rooms that are perfectly designed for me to play however I want. I can sneak around the enemies and not make a sound, or I can punch everything in my way. Sneaking around becomes easier when using the watch to hack things and distract enemies, or the lighter to throw down smokes, or the camera to blind the enemies to go through places where the enemy doesn't move away from. But there were moments where I got caught, and this is where James' personality comes up and what this game does differently than others. Every action I took filled up a bar. I like to call it the charisma bar, but the game calls it focus bar. I'll call them both. I could use the bar to bring enemies closer to me by luring them for stealth, and this made the bar feel like it was a resource that I needed to save up for harder parts of the mission. Or I could use this bar to lie my way around where I needed to go. This bar can be used to get James out of trouble if I focus on stealth. When I am sneaking around and someone finds me, I get the option of going straight into punching or convince the enemy that James has a good reason to be there. If you have enough energy on the bar, James makes up an excuse as to why he is where he isn't supposed to. Honestly, I love this mechanic because you have no idea what James is gonna say, and he comes up with the silliest excuses and they work for a short period of time.
Excuse me, Bill Clay, operations. The CLO is down with a bad case of food poisoning. Your team didn't happen to order the Merg Malai by any chance, did you?
What? No. No takeaway.
Better safe than sorry. Carry on.
If the bar is not enough, everything goes wrong and the cover is blown. This leads to punching and throwing people around. Even if I am a huge fan of punching mechanics, I have to admit this game does get repetitive when it comes to the enemy patterns when you go into hand-to-hand combat. The enemies always have the same pattern: punch, kick, punch, or punch, punch, kick. And if it's a mini boss, they mix a grab in between. James can punch, dodge, and grab, and mix these moves however you want and be as creative as you want. The locations also have stuff around that can benefit you and also spice up the hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes there's books, battles, and tools that can be thrown at enemies, and sometimes there's fire hydrants on the walls that blow up when an enemy is pushed to it. Even when having all the options to be creative, the enemy fighting patterns are very noticeable because hand-to-hand combat is what you do most. They even have boss fights that are mainly close combat, and thankfully the bosses change their pattern up until the end of the game. When there's a mini boss that is not killed fast enough, they can start shooting, and that's when the dynamic changes.
You are outmatched and outsmarted!
One very small thing I think is creative is the way they tell James it's time to shoot, and it's with this notification on top. Once a gun is pulled on James, he gets the license to kill. Once the license comes up is when things start blowing up. When I got to shoot guns, I felt it was very limited in missions because it's almost always at the end of the mission. However, the way the shooting works is extremely fun and creative once you get the hang of the mechanics. James gets a tactical pistol and has limited amount of ammo. Ammo can be picked up by killing an enemy and stealing their weapons, or by shooting their hand and grabbing the weapon from the air. You can shoot at the legs and then finish them by punching them or grabbing them, and this is why the shooting is so fun. The shooting and the hand-to-hand combat can be mixed up in whatever way with no limitations. It's not only shooting heads and keep going, it's also showing off however you want. I could shoot a person in the leg and then grab them, push them, and then headshot that enemy. This opened up how creative I wanted to be when it comes to the shooting. The charisma bar I mentioned before can also be used to slow down time and get a precision shot in. If the fight is too hectic, You slow down time to shoot the hand to switch off your empty weapon, or you could simply shoot at the head, but a headshot is not always the best approach because there is a moment where armored enemies come in and make the game even more interesting. Bringing back the creativity to the topic, there's a bunch of destructive environments around, so multiple enemies can be killed with one explosion, and opportunities can be created with the watch in case there's no more weapons or ammo around. The watch is very important, and it's really cool how realistic or grounded they made the gadgets. I really like how the gadgets are everyday things that can do unbelievable damage. When a mission starts, I had the option of making a loadout to take into the mission while also considering how I wanted to approach the mission. And I love that because it was up to me how the mission went. If I was planning on going stealth, I could benefit from the smoke screen. If I wanted to go full aggressive, I could use the missile pencil. And then there's things like poison darts that help me by making someone sick so I could pickpocket them while in the open. Each of these has a specific use, and depending on the loadout I got, made the missions harder or easier. If I chose all of my loadout to make stealth easier and my cover got blown because I didn't pay attention to my charisma bar and I couldn't lie my way out of trouble, my loadout now was kind of useless because I made a loadout for stealth, not explosives. I couldn't use that loadout for full-blown force to power through the mission, even if the game makes a good effort to have different things in the map to benefit different loadouts. The game doesn't require you to do stealth only, and there's no real incentive to go full stealth instead of full close quarter combat. On the hardest difficulty, James dies with 3 hits, and even that isn't challenging. The challenging parts came from the obligatory shooting parts where I died really fast, and they were harder because the places where James took cover could be destroyed. It felt like I needed to keep moving closer to the enemies to punch them once I was out of ammo, because even if I was in the middle of the bullets and I started punching an enemy, the bullets wouldn't hit me. It felt like I was immune to getting shot if I got into a fist fight. The sections with stealth also felt bad because the AI seemed like they were deaf. Every single takedown James does makes a lot of noise, and the enemy could be right next to the other enemy and not hear anything. That wasn't the worst though. If I am in a room fist fighting enemies and there's more enemies in the next room, the noise I made in the first room is not enough to alert the enemies in the other room. These issues prevented me from caring too much about stealth because there wasn't really a sense of danger. If I made a noise and the enemies in the other room rushed me, it would have been a better experience because I would constantly be afraid to be surrounded by multiple enemies.
Don't mind her. Trust me. You don't want to miss out on this.
What the? You're sweet talking that cow right in front of me.
Please. I'm leaving.
I played through the game twice. The first playthrough was on the hardest difficulty and the second on the easiest, and I had a lot more fun on the second playthrough because the restrictions were not there. On my second playthrough, I knew stealth was not necessary because the game was not hard enough to justify doing stealth, so I went all out on the explosions. All the resources I barely enjoyed on the hardest difficulty were a blast to use constantly while fist fighting and shooting. The whole time the game gave me the freedom to play how I wanted, but by playing on the hardest difficulty I missed a very important part of combat, and that is the mixture between the punching, the shooting, and the gadgets to destroy everyone and everything around. I would recommend you play the game on the easiest or regular difficulty, and if you want to do a second playthrough, you try the hardest. I mentioned before that the environment around is destructible, and this is extremely cool, but also gets a bit annoying with the cover system the game has. To take cover, there's a normal crouch with R3, and James automatically adjusts to the wall when you're right behind it. This is convenient, but also a bit annoying because the button that actually takes cover is the R1. This button is also to run, so you have to press it twice to run and hide to cover. This is a bit awkward because there is no indicator that shows where the covering will take place unless you're crouched, and this makes it so that you take cover to your nearest object instead of the one in front of you. When you're shooting and taking cover, there can be an object closer to you, and if you press R1, it will take cover there instead of where you wanted it to because there's no indicator. Whenever you talk to NPCs, you have multiple options of conversation, and while sometimes this gives you information to get the side paths to take, most times you are only choosing the side dialogues for random information. Well, at the beginning it did make me think the conversation was necessary. It's just conversation to add to the world building. That is cool, but I wanted to mention it in case you thought there were different paths and different dialogues that lead to different outcomes every single time, and that every conversation has consequences, because they do not. The game ran flawlessly for me. I didn't even have any bugs or FPS drops, and that's impressive to me because there's a lot of things on the screen when you start shooting. The shooting sections mostly consist of you blowing up everything around, and the game never gave me any problems, except for the loading times. I played on the PS5 Pro, and every time I died and had to restart something, the loading took a little bit longer than I would have liked. And just to confirm this wasn't only a problem for me, I looked it up, and there's a lot of complaints about the loading on the PS5 and some complaints about image quality in some places, but I didn't experience anything else. After finishing the game, there is no New Game Plus yet, but there is a chapter selection. If you went through a certain place in a specific way, you can try and see the different paths you didn't take. Adding to the replayability, you get a mode called Tactical Simulation, or TACSIM for short. These are challenges and missions that you have to do in certain ways, and if you don't, you lose. The funny thing about TACSIM is that it has the solution to most of the problems I had with combat. I mentioned before that there was no real incentive to do stealth because the consequences of being caught was a fistfight that was easy to do. Well, in some missions in TACSIM, the consequence is that you lose the whole mission. Some missions also have way harder enemies, so you do want to do stealth because they will kick your ass. These challenges are hard and they're fun, and that's why I wish the things that TACSIM has were in the hardest difficulty of the game while I was doing the story. .007 was a great experience for me. I really loved the story and how cool James Bond is. I enjoyed the fact that I could do most of the missions in stealth even if it wasn't the best experience or had the most incentive. I really liked the world, the characters, and the set pieces when everything went wrong in missions. The game is such a fun experience, but it does have issues that are noticeable, like the stealth not being necessary, the close quarter combat being too easy and predictable and repetitive. However, none of these issues made me drop the game. If you're looking for a game that has a good amount of replayability with different playstyles and an introduction to a really charming character to become a fan of, I recommend this game to you. After finishing First Light, I can't wait to see what else James Bond can do in the future.
Well, what are we waiting for?
There's that English sang-froid. Bonne chance, James.